The chances of nuclear war erupting in Europe have just skyrocketed. France has just suggested that it's willing to make a game-changing move that will see its nuclear weapons give Russian President Vladimir Putin something new to think about. And it's not just France. Germany is set to become a key part of a bold new move to create a powerful nuclear umbrella designed to protect all of Europe. The US is stunned. But what does France have up its sleeve? Why is it changing the way it uses its nuclear weapons? And what does the United States have to do with this brash new move? The initial news of France's plans comes in a February 24th report published by The Telegraph. It says that France is planning to deploy fighter jets armed with nuclear weapons to German military bases to provide Europe with a stronger nuclear shield. The move comes amidst a lot of change happening in Europe at the moment. Many on the continent are worried that US President Donald Trump is inching ever closer to withdrawing the 100,000 or so soldiers his country deploys in Europe. There are also big changes in Germany to consider. On February 23rd, Friedrich Merz won Germany's national elections. He's expected to become the country's new chancellor in the coming weeks, and he's calling on the rest of Europe to up its defense game. Putin is too much of a threat, Merz believes. The rest of Europe needs to show him that it can equal his threat. The Telegraph report leads us to several other questions, chief among them being why France is choosing to consider deploying nuclear weapons in other countries now. There are several potential answers to that question. First, this isn't an idea that's come out of the blue. The Warzone, or TWZ, points out that France has been discussing the possibility of creating a European nuclear umbrella with Germany for some time now. Merz has also been vocal in his support of a greater deterrent against Russia. France's President Emmanuel Macron met with soon-to-be German Chancellor before his February 24th meeting with Donald Trump at the White House. It's unknown exactly what took place during the discussion between Macron and Merz. There was probably some congratulating of Germany's incoming Chancellor involved. However, Macron likely travelled to speak with Merz because defence was on his mind. Merz seems to suggest as much. Before meeting with Macron, he said, "We need to have discussions with both the British and the French, the two European nuclear powers, about whether nuclear sharing or at least nuclear security from the United Kingdom and France could also apply to us." In other words, Merz is worried about Germany's future. The country doesn't have nuclear weapons of its own. That goes for every European country outside of the UK and France. The idea of sharing now is about ensuring Europe creates a stronger united front against what many see as a looming Russian threat. And that brings us to the second reason France is set to make its bold nuclear move. It wants to send a warning to Putin. Speaking to The Telegraph, an unnamed French official said, "Posting a few French nuclear jet fighters in Germany should not be difficult and would send a strong message. That message would be directed at Putin as a direct response to the many nuclear threats Russia's leader has made during his invasion of Ukraine." Since February 2022, Russia has placed its nuclear weapons on heightened alert, along with testing and deploying new nuclear capabilities, and threatening to resume nuclear testing, according to the UK's House of Commons. Putin also suspended Russia's participation in the 2010 New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, in 2023. That treaty, which Russia signed jointly with the United States, places a limit of 1,550 nuclear warheads on Moscow. That's 30% less than the 2,200 limit set in the previous SORT treaty. It also includes restrictions on how both the US and Russia can deploy and use their missiles, bombers, and nuclear weapon launchers. Now it's out of the window, at least temporarily, as Russia battles to overcome Ukraine. The biggest European concern related to Putin's nuclear threats came in November 2024. Putin chose that month to sign a decree updating Russia's formal nuclear doctrine. That decree, uncoincidentally, came immediately after the United States approved Ukraine's use of US-made long-range missiles on Russian territory. Among the changes to Russia's doctrine was language suggesting that Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons as a response to conventional weapons that it believes represent a critical threat to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, according to the Arms Control Association, or ACA. The policy also says that Russia may use its nukes if it receives reliable information about incoming ballistic missiles. In short, Russia gave itself the right to use nukes if its enemies used conventional weapons on its territory. Worse yet for Europe, language in the new doctrine suggests that the right to nuclear weapon usage extends to the allies of countries that supply Russia's enemies with those conventional weapons. That puts almost the entirety of Europe in Russia's nuclear crosshairs. The European Union, or EU, alone, of which Germany and France are members, has contributed almost $139 billion in aid to Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. There's also another $120.8 billion waiting to be allocated. Most of this money has gone toward purchasing new weapons Ukraine is using right now to attack Russia, both in Ukraine and on Russia's territory. Based on these actions, the conditions for triggering Putin's new nuclear doctrine has already been met. France's bold move is a direct response to Putin's nuclear rhetoric. Yes, Russia has access to nuclear weapons and is threatening to use them. However, Europe isn't helpless on that front. By moving some of its nukes to Germany, France places them within closer range to Russia. If Putin launches a nuclear attack, France's latest move means that Europe is primed to respond. But why is France choosing to send this message now? We hinted at the reason earlier, which also brings us to the third answer as to why France has chosen now to make its move. Europe may not be able to rely on the US nuclear threat for much longer. The US is the only country in the world that comes close to matching Russia's nuclear threat when it comes to pure numbers. According to the ACA, the US has stockpiles of 5,225 nukes. Russia is a little ahead, it has 5,580 nuclear weapons. But the two are essentially equal when it comes to pure destructive force. That matters because the United States has long guaranteed Europe's safety by stationing a small collection of its nukes on the continent. The majority of those warheads are held at military bases in Germany, which is home to around 100 missiles. Therein lies the problem for Germany. In the past, it has essentially presented a nuclear threat to Russia by virtue of America's presence in the country. That threat was reinforced by America's membership in NATO. Article 5 of NATO's charter means every member of the organization is duty-bound to come to the defense of any other member nation that's attacked by another country. If Russia launched its nuclear weapons at Germany, France, or almost any other European nation, it would likely have been met with US nuclear missile strikes. Only that isn't guaranteed anymore. According to Newsweek, Trump is already planning to withdraw 20,000 of the 100,000 soldiers the US has stationed in Europe, cutting America's forces on the continent by a fifth. Trump's first stint as US president also saw him make numerous threats that he would withdraw the US from NATO. At the time, how much fellow NATO countries paid toward their own defense was Trump's big issue. Most weren't meeting NATO's 2% of gross domestic product or GDP guideline on spending, leading Trump to claim that the US was essentially paying for Europe's defense. Trump wasn't necessarily wrong with these claims, and though he's pulled back from his talk of quitting NATO in his second term as president, you have to believe that all of these threats play on Europe's collective mind. Many on the continent don't trust America's president. They worry that he might pull even more American troops out of Europe after the initial 20,000. If that happens, what does it mean for the US-made nuclear weapons stored in Germany? Do they stay where they are? The nukes fall under the NATO umbrella, but that might not mean much if Trump starts considering withdrawing the US from the collective defense organization again. France's move is a shock to the American system as much as it is to the Russian one. It's Europe's not-so-subtle way of telling Trump that the continent doesn't need him. The United States has also been making moves over the past few weeks that trigger alarm bells in European heads. On February 3rd, Trump hinted that he might follow up the 25% tariffs he's levying on Mexico and Canada with more tariffs aimed at the EU. He told the BBC that EU tariffs could happen pretty soon, adding, "They don't take our cars, they don't take our farm products, they take almost nothing and we take everything from them. Millions of cars, tremendous amounts of food and farm products." Implementing tariffs on the EU would be Trump's way of punishing Europe for not buying enough from the United States. It's also worth mentioning that the EU has condemned Trump's decision to levy tariffs against Mexico and Canada and says that it will respond firmly if it becomes a target. More signs of fractures between Europe and the US came on February 24th. On that date, the United Nations General Assembly, or UNGA, proposed a resolution calling for a comprehensive resolution to Russia's Ukraine invasion. The United States drafted its own resolution titled "The Path to Peace" that also called for an immediate end to the hostilities, while placing no blame on either side for starting the conflict. However, it was a UNGA resolution that contained strong language condemning Russia's actions that was the key talking point. The US voted against that resolution, which many saw as a refusal by Trump to condemn Putin for his Ukraine invasion. The US joined an interesting cast of countries with that decision. China, India, Iran, and Iraq all refused to vote on the resolution, which was actually a more moderate take on the conflict than that provided by the US. America was one of only 18 nations to vote against the resolution, with others including Russia, obviously, Israel, Sudan, Hungary, and Belarus. The latter two are among the few European nations that are unwilling to condemn Putin, likely because they hold close ties with Russia. From threats of NATO withdrawal to his refusal to condemn Putin, Trump seems to be sending a clear message to Europe. He's not on the continent's side, at least not as much as Europe expects him to be. And with these fractures creating the possibility that the US might withdraw its troops and nukes from Europe, the reasons behind France's bold move become clearer. It needs to send nuclear weapons to Germany to make up for the American nukes that Europe might lose. Of course, none of this is guaranteed. The US may not withdraw its nuclear weapons at all. However, France's decision indicates that many on the continent are now taking the need to protect themselves, with or without American involvement, far more seriously. That's the fourth answer to the why now question. France is planning on shipping nuclear weapons to Germany because it believes it's about time Europe started taking care of itself. Macron hinted at this during his joint interview with Trump at the White House on February 24th. In addition to interrupting Trump numerous times to correct him on various issues, such as how much Europe has collectively spent in Ukraine, Macron also called on Europe to do more to protect the continent. I'm here as well after discussions with all my colleagues to say that Europe is willing to step up to be a stronger partner, to do more in defense and security for its continent, and to be engaged on trade, economy, and investments. Remember that Macron met with incoming German Chancellor Friedrich Merz before his press conference with Trump. Perhaps stepping up is Macron's subtle way of saying that nuclear weapons are coming to Germany. There are other signs that Europe is pulling itself away from its reliance on the US. Defense spending across Europe is on the rise, hitting an average 2.2% of GDP in 2024. Several European countries have already committed to going much further than that. The Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia plan to hit 5% of GDP spending on defense in 2025, with Poland not that far behind at 4.7% of GDP. There are also suggestions that Europe is quietly working on plans to send troops into Ukraine at some point in the future. Whether those troops will be a peacekeeping force or a united European army designed to deter Putin isn't clear, but what we can take from all of this is that France's bold move to send nuclear weapons into Germany is part of a wider plan. Europe is getting stronger. It has to, given the threat that Russia poses and the wildcard status of the US right now. The question now is simple: will France's nuclear weapons be enough? It's tough to gauge. On the surface, France is nowhere near Russia when it comes to the sheer volume of nuclear weapons it has at its disposal. We touched on this earlier with the ACA stats suggesting that Russia has 5,580 nuclear weapons. France is a long way behind. It has 290 nukes in its military stockpile, with none of those weapons being strategically deployed. That means all 290 of France's warheads are currently assigned for potential use if the need arises, rather than already being ready to go on ballistic missiles and in bomber bases. Sending nuclear weapons to Germany may change all of that. We also have to consider how France's nukes will be used and what types they have available. TWZ provides some answers here. It says the majority of the nuclear weapons that would make their way to Germany will be mounted on Air Sol Moyen Portée A, or ASMP-A, missiles. These are supersonic land attack cruise missiles that are launched from fighter jets to hit targets on the ground. Each is capable of carrying a 440-pound payload. That payload can include TN-80 and TN-81 nuclear warheads, which each have 300 kiloton yields. For context, this is one of the most common sizes of nuclear weapons, with 300 kilotons being roughly equivalent to 300,000 tons of TNT. They're extremely dangerous nukes. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences says that a single 300 kiloton nuke would create a 1-mile wide fireball that reaches 200 million degrees at its center. Half a second after detonation, all streets and metal surfaces within 3/4 of a mile would dissolve. A massive blast wave would follow, generating winds of up to 750 miles per hour that crush buildings and send vehicles flying. 3 miles away from the blast zone, the clothes on people's backs would burst into flames, with any exposed skin suffering immediate third-degree burns. Ultimately, the wide area fire generated by just one of these nukes would have a radius of up to 4.5 miles and would destroy an entire area of up to 65 square miles, more than enough to devastate almost any Russian city. The ASMP-A missile, used to send these nuclear warheads to their destinations, is also capable of traveling up to 310 miles. That's not an especially long range. The distance between Berlin and Moscow is about 1,000 miles, meaning France couldn't just launch its nukes from the safety of German territory. It would need the second part of the package it's planning to send, the Dassault Rafale. France's main multi-role fighter is capable of reaching a top speed of 863 miles per hour. though its approach speed drops to a little under 140 miles per hour. It has a 50,000-foot service ceiling and a combat range of up to 1,150 miles. That's enough to get the jet from Berlin to Moscow, though not quite enough to secure its safe passage back. TWZ says that France and Germany would likely use aerial tankers, which are massive aircraft used to refuel other planes while they're in the air, to ensure the Rafales can make their dangerous journeys before returning to base. Better yet, none of France's nuclear weapons fall under the NATO banner. The ASMPA is a sovereign capability, says TWZ, which means it isn't part of the dual-key arrangement that led to the US supplying its B-61 nuclear warheads to Europe. France can do whatever it pleases with its nukes in terms of deploying and using them without worrying about NATO's guidelines. That's good news for Europe. However, there's another wild card within France's bold nuclear plan that we haven't discussed yet: the United Kingdom. Will it get involved and also supply Germany with nuclear weapons to use as a frontline deterrent against Putin? It would be a powerful ally if it did. The UK has 225 nukes in its military stockpiles, which would almost double Europe's deterrent against Russia. The country's Trident warheads can also be launched from submarines, which delivers a second option in terms of how Europe could attack Russia. However, the UK hasn't confirmed anything yet. There are signs that it might be willing to join France in contributing to Europe's new nuclear shield, though. During a visit to Kyiv on Monday, former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson claimed that there was a moral case for Ukraine to have its own nuclear weapons. Current Prime Minister Keir Starmer also sided with European leaders ahead of Trump in calling for a resolution to the war. The UK was among the nations that signed the UN resolution that the US voted against. Plus, Britain has indicated a desire to sign a defence and security pact with the EU, which will be vital given that the UK is no longer part of that collective. France's move may be designed to get the UK involved too. An unnamed diplomat who spoke to The Telegraph says if the French move to place a nuclear deterrent in Germany, it would indeed increase pressure on the Brits to follow suit. My understanding is that on the CDU, or Counter-Disinformation Unit side, the thinking is that we need a nuclear umbrella. We want to have a say in this, we should be ready to talk about this, and we are willing to pay for it. The caveat to that claim is that the US would have to withdraw its nukes from Germany first before the UK sends any from its stockpile, says the diplomat. Perhaps that's the case for France's plan too. The Telegraph notes that it's unknown just how serious the discussions about moving French nuclear weapons to Germany are. Talks may be in their early stages. It may also be months or even years before we see any movement. So much seems to depend on what the US does with its nukes. One thing is for certain. Putin can't rely on the US pulling its nukes to minimize the threat Europe poses to his imperialistic ambitions anymore. France is willing to replace those nuclear weapons with warheads of its own, showing Putin and Trump that Europe is taking what happens on its continent very seriously. But what do you think about France's bold move? Is it sending a message to the US with its nuclear plans? How will Putin respond? Let us know what you think in the comments and subscribe to our channel for the latest news about how Europe plans to defend itself against Russia.